second child in his family after his 9-year-old sister Judith. In this video, I'm only analyzing the original timeline of Michael's life, which includes the events of Halloween, Halloween 2, Return, Revenge, and Curse. The date of Michael's birth in this timeline is not explicitly stated, but in Halloween Resurrection, which is part of a different timeline, we learn this.
Michael Myers, born October 19th, 1957.
Both of these timelines start with the same movie, Halloween, which would imply that Michael was also born on October 19th in that movie. I like to think about the Halloween timeline as a train map, which I call the Halloween Express. So think about it like this. If we depart from the station, Halloween 1, at exactly 10:19, we can go straight and end up in Curse of Michael Myers, or we can go this way and end up at Halloween Resurrection. No matter which way we went, we still departed from the Halloween 1 station at 10:19. The counter-argument to that idea is Halloween 2018. In Rick Rosenthal's Halloween 2, we learn Michael Myers and Laurie Strode are siblings, which would mean that they were always siblings, even in Halloween 1. However, in Halloween 2018, they don't appear to be related, because the 40-year timeline does not pass through Halloween 2. However, it's possible that they still are related, just nobody ever finds out.
Wasn't it her brother who, cold-blooded murdered all of his teenagers?
No. That's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
There are other retcons that don't carry over to other timelines, so all I'll say with certainty is that Michael was born sometime in the year 1957. Yeah, this is going to be one of those episodes of horror history. Michael was 3 years old when his sister Laurie was born in February 1961. His early childhood is presumably a normal one until 2.5 years later, when he is cursed by an ancient demon known as Thorn. To learn what really happened to Michael after disappearing from Haddonfield, stick around to the end of this video. Huge wooden figures filled with men. Not much is known of the Druid culture because they did not keep any records, but around 500 BCE, they did create an ancient alphabet carved into stone and wood runes. These runes were used for pagan rituals in order to help the tribe predict future events. One of the icons was the symbol of Thorn, which was designed after the Thorn constellation and was used to represent an ancient demon that plagued the Celtic people.
Among the ancient Druids, Thorn represented a demon that spread sickness, destroyed crops, brought death to hundreds of thousands of people. According to Celtic legend, one child from each tribe was chosen to be inflicted with the curse of Thorn.
While knowledge of the demon Thorn faded into legend over the coming millennia, the bloodline of the tribe stayed intact, and one offshoot of the population ended up in the Midwest region of the United States. They continued to practice their ritualistic sacrifices in fear of the malicious demon, and they called themselves the Cult of Thorn. In the early 1960s, the leader of the cult was a man by the name of Terrence Plant, who worked at the sanitarium known as Smith's Grove by day, and used the facility as a meeting place and worship ground by night.
One child from each tribe was chosen to be inflicted with the curse of Thorn, to offer the blood sacrifices of its next of kin on the night of Samhain.
Halloween.
The sacrifice of one family meant sparing the lives of an entire tribe.
So Dr. Wynn believed that if he and his cult placed the curse of Thorn on one child, the child would be compelled to kill his entire family, but the rest of the tribe would be protected from things like disease, death, plague, and drought for an entire generation. I do not know how their selection process went, but Dr. Wynn ends up choosing a 6-year-old boy by the name of Michael Audrey Myers. The curse must be placed during the festival of Samhain, which is a Gaelic festival of pagan origins where the barrier would supposedly be down between the real and the unreal, allowing sacrifices, be those crops, animals, or in the case of the Halloween movies, human sacrifices, to be made. Samhain takes place every year at the end of the harvest season. Today, in the Northern Hemisphere, we call that Halloween night. However, in the eyes of the cult, some Halloween nights were more special than others.
The Druids were also great mathematicians and astronomers. The Thorn symbol is actually a constellation of stars that appears from time to time on Halloween night. Whenever it appears, it appears.
I'd like to note that the Druids, the pagans, the festival of Samhain, and the ritualistic sacrifice of crops and animals during the festival are based on real life, while the cult of Thorn and the Thorn constellation are not, but the name Thorn is based off of a letter in the Old English alphabet. It looks kind of like a P and a B put together, and so they made the movie version just look a little bit more Thorn. The Thorn constellation in the Halloween movies appears in the sky at seemingly random intervals. They're just the same years that the Halloween movies came out. Its first appearance in Michael's lifetime comes in 1963, and this is the night that Dr. Wynn and his cult placed the curse on the young boy, forever changing his behavior and making him an empty, soulless killing machine. In my Things You Missed episode on Halloween 1978, I talked about how Michael's actions that night could be interpreted as representing a release of psychosexual trauma that Michael was too young to understand. I went in depth with the psychological interpretation on that video because it doesn't fall in line with the information presented in Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. So in this video, since we're analyzing his entire character, that psychological interpretation doesn't make sense. Michael is simply possessed by the cult. Michael Myers' power is described by Dr. Wynn as something greater than a man driven to commit crimes.
Evil,
pure, uncorrupted, ancient.
On October 31st, 1963, Michael's parents go out for the evening, and his older sister is hanging out with her boyfriend. So he's left in the care of an older woman named Mrs. Blankenship across the street. He begins to hear a voice in his head. Presumably, this was the voice of Dr. Wynne, or possibly the demon Thorn itself.
Michael heard a voice?
It told him to kill his family.
And that's exactly what he does. He grabs a knife and goes to take out his sister by stabbing her several times, before his parents eventually come home to discover what he had done. Michael is sentenced to Smith's Grove Sanitarium and assigned to a doctor named Samuel Loomis. In a hearing 6 months later, in April 1964, Loomis was instructed to report on Michael's progress to the courts 2 times a year.
Further, Michael Audrey Myers shall be brought before the court on the day of his 21st birthday, where he shall be tried as an adult.
Michael was seemingly in a catatonic state, causing nearly everyone to see him as harmless other than Dr. Loomis. His initial stay at Smith's Grove lasted 15 years, none of which is documented in the Halloween films. However, the non-canon Chaos Comics material tells of Michael's involvement in more murders. These stories occasionally contradict the canon, but they were written to go in tandem with Michael's original story, so no, they don't technically count as part of his history, but let's go over them briefly. Michael was sent to room with a number of male patients, one of which was a psychopath named Tony O'Malley, who got into a scuffle with Michael one night before bed and had to be separated by a security guard. He was put off by Michael's non-speaking nature and plans to attack him in his sleep, but Michael was not asleep and shoved a crayon, or depending on where you're from, a crayon, into Tony's left eye. Tony was actually one of the few Michael victims to survive, but the crayon, or crayon, pressed up against his brain, causing him to become more delusional and violent, landing him in a padded cell for solitary confinement. In November 1964, a juvenile named Adrian Wade, who suffered from an obsessive eating disorder, ate a cake that was intended for Michael, so Michael trapped him in the showers and tortured him with scalding hot water. He was found unconscious with multiple burns and later died in the hospital laying with heart failure. Years would go by without incident, and most of the staff considered Michael a model patient. But then, in 1971, another young patient, a self-harmer named Roger, who claimed to have witnessed Michael's attack on Tony O'Malley, was found after supposedly biting off his own tongue and choking on it. If you're familiar with Michael, you can probably assume that that's not how things really went down. That Halloween, one of the asylum's administrators decided to put on a Halloween party for the kids, and Michael wore a clown costume. The same costume he wore when he jabbed Judith in 1963. A girl named Nancy teased Michael for having cooties. During a game of bobbing for apples, lightning struck the building, causing the power to go out. And in the cover of darkness, Michael drowned her and disappeared before the lights came back up. When Loomis discovers what happened, he's furious, frustrated by his patient's continued silence, and nearly strikes the boy before being stopped by his fiancée, Jennifer. Jennifer mentions that she believes Michael belongs in a prison, which Michael seems to hear, and he decides to make her his next target. He throws her off the roof of the building, and it is ruled that she made the jump by herself. What do all of these Chaos Comics victims have in common? They all did something that Michael didn't like. Whether it's aggression, stolen food, accusations, general teasing, or wishing ill on him, all of these characters suffer from a form of revenge. In the Cult of Thorn arc, that's not how Michael operates. He's driven by a supernatural evil that tells him what to do, and he has one goal, which we'll talk about later. That's part of why the comics are not considered canon, so let's get back to what is canon. The original Rampage that would take place on Halloween night in October 1978. Michael Myers turns 21 years old, and so was due back in court to be tried as an adult. Dr. Loomis and Nurse Marion Chambers were supposed to transport him to his trial, so Michael took action to make sure that this was not possible. He destroyed his room at Smith's Grove, freed many of his fellow captives, and left behind the word sister in blood, although to most this appeared to be a reference to his older sister Judith, because his younger sister's existence was hidden from the public, and she was given a new name and new family so that she would be protected from any potential harassment. Since Dr. Wynne was the administrator of the sanitarium and also the leader of the Cult of Thorn, it's not hard to imagine that he didn't exactly try his hardest to prevent Michael's escape. Michael waits for Loomis and Chambers to pull up to the sanitarium, and when Loomis gets out to use the nearby phone, he attacks Marion, driving her out of the vehicle, which he takes for himself. I know you can play as Michael Myers in Dead by Daylight, but I think this is proof that he should also be playable in GTA.
Let's go forward.
Michael's ability to drive without any training or experience has always been a point of question, one that's even brought up in the movie.
Sam Haddonfield is 150 miles away from here now. For God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night.
When you consider the fact that Michael is no ordinary mental patient, but rather more of a vessel for this ancient evil known as Thorn, this starts to make more sense. Throughout his story, we discover many of the powers granted to him by Thorn, so the ability to operate a car doesn't seem that far-fetched. During his 1978 rampage, Michael is trying to recreate the experience he had when killing his older sister in 1963. I like to think of it as a ritual that he established when he was 6, going after his older sister, and now he's trying to recreate it, going after his younger sister. When he was 6, he wore a one-piece clown suit and mask, his Halloween costume. So this time, he puts together a similar attire. He runs a mechanic's truck off the road and annihilates him to get the one-piece suit, and when he gets into Haddonfield, he breaks into the general store and steals his now iconic mask in place of the clown mask. He also steals some rope, which he would use later. Next, he breaks into his old home, which now sits abandoned. When they later investigate the house, they find a dead dog, which Loomis has his own explanation for.
He got hungry.
Okay, he knows his patient best, so I'm willing to accept that explanation. At this point, his sister Lori stops by the house to leave a key under the mat at the request of her adoptive father, who's a realtor who is trying to sell the place. Michael sees her walk up to the front door and leave the key, but he lets her walk away and stares at her as she makes her way towards her school. Did Michael immediately know that this was his sister, or did Lori become a target simply because he was angry that his old house was being sold? We'll get our answer a little bit later, but for now, we just need to know that Michael is planning to make Lori one of his future victims. I also wondered why he stalks Lori throughout the day instead of just killing her right now. He follows her to school and stares her down through the window during her English class, then, after killing some time skulking around the elementary school, keeps surveillance on Lori and her friends as they walk home from school. When Annie yells out at him, he even stops and seems to consider killing them all right then and there, but doesn't. So what's the big holdup? Obviously, the real reason is that the movie would only be 22 minutes long if he killed them in daylight, but also, in 1963, Michael was given his curse as part of the Festival of Samhain. And if we go back to the holiday's origins in Celtic Ireland, it was celebrated starting in the evening on October 31st. So if Michael is waiting for nightfall for the sake of tradition, that may also explain what he does next. He stops by the cemetery and steals his sister's tombstone, with plans to use it as a prop during his recreation for that. Instead of an immediate sibling slice and dice, he just keeps an eye on her, staring from behind some hedges, watching her through her bedroom window, and following her and Annie as they head to their babysitting jobs that evening. When they arrive, he waits for them to park and watches them go to their respective jobs. Remember, if you've seen My Things You Missed can only be described with one word: unsettling. Everything he does is very methodical, from his slow walking, to his empty staring into space, to his complete silence as he does it all. This creates the impression that he's essentially a blank slate, void of character, almost like a machine programmed by the curse that's been placed on him. This not only fits the idea of the character essentially being a shape that does these things without interjecting any personality, but also taps into elements that the human mind perceives as unsettling. The core reason that people can easily be off-put by the idea of voyeurism goes back to basic survival instinct. When humans lived in the wild, if another lurking animal had eyes on them, it was most likely a predator getting ready to strike. So we're genetically predisposed to be uncomfortable in these situations and avoid them. One of the first studies on the sensation of being watched was called The Feeling of Being Stared At, a title almost as fitting to its content as the title of that one 80s movie with the Blob, which was called The Blob. The article's author, Dr. Edward Titchener, disproves the idea that someone's gaze itself could be what gives you those goosebumps. That unsettled feeling you get is something that you give yourself. In fact, an actual voyeur isn't even necessary. You can get creeped out just by believing that you're being watched. Michael takes advantage of this by popping in, being seen by the victim he's stalking, and then disappearing, leaving his target to wonder if he's still somewhere nearby, zeroing in on them with that piercing stare.
Lord, the boogeyman's outside, look!
There's nobody outside.
But it would not be long before Michael Myers' apparent voyeurism would escalate into much more dangerous behavior. Night continues as he focuses on Laurie's friend Annie, who's babysitting at the Wallace house across the street. He starts by locking her in the laundry room, then after she gets out, he eavesdrops as she makes evening plans with her boyfriend. And by evening plans, I mean set. Michael hides inside of her car, she drops off the little girl Lindsay across the street at the Doyle's house, and when she comes back, she hops into the vehicle to go pick up Paul, and he lets her discover that she's not alone before getting down to business. And by business, I mean killing her. He didn't even have the courtesy to phone Paul and let him know that his ride is canceled. He moves Annie's body inside for later use. When he comes back downstairs, he discovers two more horny teens have appeared, Linda and her boyfriend Bob, who are getting at it on the couch. After they move things upstairs, Bob heads down to the kitchen for a drink, and Michael surprises him by doing this. He pins Bob to the wall with a butcher's knife, then further conceals his identity by dressing up as a bedsheet ghost, which, I mean, if he wanted to pretend to be Bob in order to trick Linda, he's already in a costume. He's rocking the mask and jumpsuit. But I guess the bedsheet ghost maybe does a better job of concealing his physique, because he's much more physically imposing than Bob. Putting Bob's glasses over the ghost costume is enough to convince Linda that that's her boyfriend, and when she turns her back to him to call Laurie, he strangles her with the phone cord. With all three of Laurie's friends across the street out of commission, Michael turns out the last remaining lights in the house, much like how the sanitarium went dark before he took out his fellow patient Nancy in 1971. He then arranges the body of Annie in the upstairs bedroom under Judith Meyer's tombstone as a tribute to his first ever attack. and waits for his younger sister to stumble upon it. Linda is stuffed in a closet, and Bob is hung up in the closet with the rope that he stole earlier. Good plan. After discovering this, Laurie stumbles out of the room in a mess of emotions, and Michael emerges from the darkness of the room next door, in what is probably the coolest shot in Halloween. She's chased back across the street and tries to defend herself by sticking a knitting needle through his neck, which does cause him to drop to the floor for some time. If you're watching this video, you probably already know that Michael Myers is invincible, and this is a result of the powers he acquires by being cursed by the ancient demon Thorn. But at the same time, he isn't just an unstoppable machine. Hurting him enough will put him down for short periods of time, which I refer to as his recharge periods. When he comes back to, he follows Laurie back up the stairs and finds her tending to the kids, but now his focus is on his sister. He finds her hiding in a bedroom closet and busts through. Lights on? No. Lights off. Laurie resourcefully pokes out his eye with a coat hanger, which puts him down long enough for her to get out of the room and get the kids out of the house. Michael gets a quick ab workout in, then comes for her once more, and she's only just able to rip off his mask, which completely shocks him for a moment. This is one of the few times that we see his face as an adult, and he looks shocked, almost like the mask is such an